When it comes to Russia, we can never really be reminded enough that modern Russia is really just the smaller, less powerful byproduct of the Soviet Union that actually collapsed only around 30 years ago. A lot of people forget this basic fact when we talk about Russia's dire circumstances today, and they brush off our claims about what we see going on in Russia's economy as just propaganda. But the reality is that the things that we're talking about today are things that have already happened to Russia and things that already brought the Russian Empire in the form of the Soviet Union to its knees. And when it came to the collapse of the Soviet Union, obviously there were dozens of different reasons. But most often cited as the two major reasons that finally pushed the Soviet Union over the edge were the Soviet Union getting involved in an expensive war in Afghanistan that they didn't get any returns from, that hurt them on both a financial level and also on a societal level as people got frustrated with the Soviet government. And also the crashing of energy prices that coalesced around the same time as this. Now, these facts are well documented and well proven, and right about now, they should be making pretty much every Russian extremely nervous, as the trends are now continuing, with Russia's war against Ukraine, and now what I want to talk about today in depth, crashing energy prices. It really should be giving Russians a sense of déjà vu, and definitely not the good kind. Now, when it comes to energy prices, before moving on to what is actually happening today, it helps to take a brief look at Soviet history and how the energy price trend played out there, so that we can spot the themes and the trends that are now recurring today at this very moment to a very remarkable, perhaps even disturbing degree. Now, when it comes to the Soviet Union, a lot of people will know that at the time that the Soviet Union was expanding, especially in that post-World War II period, a lot of people were looking at the Soviet Union as if it were some sort of economic miracle. And at that time, a lot of people were saying it might even be a legitimate alternative to, say, capitalism. And the reason people were saying that was because the Soviet Union was experiencing a remarkable level of growth that in a lot of cases outpaced even the United States as far as GDP growth per year. To some people, they looked at it and they said this was an economic miracle. And even Soviet leaders would tour the United States and say as much to the president's face, and they would joke and laugh with him about it. A lot of journalists bought into that, and basically right up until the day that the Soviet Union actually collapsed, there was news articles coming out saying how great things were going on inside of there. This was coming not just from the Soviet Union itself, but also from outside observers looking in. But the problem for the Soviet Union was that all of this prosperity, all of this growth was built on an incredibly shaky foundation. And essentially what the Soviet Union was doing was it was gambling, and for a time they were winning, but eventually they lost. And what they were gambling on was global energy prices. The Soviet Union, the reason they grew so fast was because they centered their economy so heavily around what they were really good at, which was oil and gas revenues that they sold to the world around them, where there was a lot of economic growth at the time because the world was recovering from the world wars. And even though there were small conflicts, for the most part, most of the world was experiencing a large degree of peace and development, and that pushed energy prices really high. The Soviet Union was gambling that they could make themselves look really strong and prosperous by selling energy to other countries that were actually more prosperous. But as it turned out, when that trend bucked and when energy prices dropped overnight, because the Soviet Union did not sufficiently diversify, because they had no other way to bring in revenues, it really took them down really, really fast. Now, right now in the modern day, in fact, at this exact moment that I'm recording this video, a similar trend is now beginning where we are seeing the world shift into a direction where there will probably be a durable change to energy prices in a negative direction. Okay, I know it's kind of confusing the way I said that, but I said it on purpose. There's going to be a durable change in energy prices for the foreseeable future. And the reason that is because of the tariffs that Trump has put on pretty much every country in the world, and that they are now putting on the United States in return, which is slowing down economic activity across the board and destroying the demand for global energy overnight. Right now, as I'm recording this video, Russian energy prices have dropped to close to $50 per barrel. And you have to understand that Russia's break-even price point for an oil barrel is $40. And so Russia is entering this point where they can really no longer turn a significant profit from their main revenue source, putting them in the same position the Soviet Union was when when the Soviet Union, in fact, collapsed. Now, while I don't have a crystal ball and I can't see the future, all indicators right now are that this drop in demand for energy is going to continue for some time, at a minimum, a period of probably several months. And the reason for that is when we look at other decisions that Trump has made and reversed, we still see that the implications of those decisions are durable. So, for example, Donald Trump removed military aid from Ukraine and then gave it back to them just about a week later. But even so, still since then, even though the decision was quickly reversed, global purchases of U.S. arms have just fallen off a cliff because of what this move signaled to the outside world. They all started looking in another direction. The same will almost certainly be true of tariffs, where even if Trump removes these tariffs overnight, and every other country removes tariffs from the United States in exchange, consumer behavior will take some time to change. And right now we see a lot of consumer behavior, particularly in European markets and also in Canada and Australia, moving in a negative direction where people just don't want to purchase much stuff anymore. They kind of want to wait this out. And if they do purchase, they definitely don't want to purchase American. So this trend that is creating the drop in energy prices is not going to be quickly reversed, and that means long-term destruction to Russia's main profit-making capabilities. So as of right now, today, as I'm recording this video, the prices of oil barrels have gone down to their lowest point that they have been since prior to Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in early 2022. And in particular, the price of Russian Ural crude oil has dropped to close to around $50 per barrel. And this is a big problem for Russia because Russia, in order to turn a profit, their break-even point on a barrel of oil is around $40. So they have to sell it for at least $40 to make any money at all. And that price is now only around $50, so they're really not making much profit per barrel. This price, to put it in context, is $10 lower than the European price cap that was placed on Russian oil towards the beginning of their full-scale invasion of Ukraine, where they set a price cap of around $60 on Russian oil to keep that oil on the market, but to prevent Russia from making enough profits to continue funding their government like they were used to. Russian government budgets are based on an assumed price per oil barrel of around $75. And so if you do $75 minus the $40 break-even mark, Russia counts on around $35 of profit per barrel of oil. If you drop that down to the price cap level, they're only now receiving about $20 of profit per barrel. And if that then goes down to $50, they're only getting around $10 of profit per barrel, which is less than 1/3 of what they actually need to meet their budget projections. Now, I've already talked about how a similar energy price drop ultimately brought down the Soviet Union and basically pushed them over the edge to a final collapse. And the reason that actually happened in the case of the Soviet Union was something hauntingly similar to what we're now seeing, where the Soviet Union was counting on oil prices to be at a certain level to meet their budget projections and allow them to make their debt payments. When oil prices dropped and then proceeded to not go back up, the Soviet Union couldn't pay their debts anymore, and then they defaulted, and that is a large part of what brought about the final ultimate collapse. And so what we're now seeing is Russia in the exact same position, except for if you really think about it, modern Russia is a lot more vulnerable than even the Soviet Union was. I've talked about this before, but modern Russia is not the Soviet Union. It's much worse for several reasons. First and foremost, the most obvious reason is that the Soviet Union wasn't just Russia, it was the Soviet Union. And that meant that they had a much more diversified economy that could take advantage of different, what are now independent countries in slightly different regions with different economic advantages. In particular, the largest of those was Ukraine in terms of population. But now in the modern day, modern Russia cannot use the economy of Ukraine to help it prop itself up. Instead, it is actually at war with the economy of Ukraine, so something that could have been used to support them is now using all of its force, along with the force of a lot of Western powers supporting it, to actively work against the Russian economy. Now, speaking of this war, at the time of the Soviet Union, of course, while they had just come out of this war in Afghanistan, which contributed to their fall, that war was nothing near the scale of what is going on in Ukraine. And what is going on in Ukraine is a country at Russia's border that has the ability and has actually been striking Russian energy targets, making it harder and harder for Russia to turn a profit on energy as it is. And so if you look at all these factors and say they brought down the Soviet Union and now we see them recurring in the case of modern Russia, we see big problems for Russia. Now, what this energy price collapse is ultimately going to do in the short term and also in the long term, as long as it continues, is it is just going to put further and further pressure on the Russian budget, which is already just hanging on by a shoestring. If you look at Russia right now, you look at the country, they have massive inflation. And that massive inflation is really an indicator that the Russian government doesn't have money in its coffers to meet its obligations. So it has to print more money in order to prevent it from defaulting, like what happened to the Soviet Union. And so what we should expect as we see these revenues from oil crater even more is that there is going to be a higher inflationary pressure on Russia because they're going to have less actual income flowing in to help them pay their bills. Again, it might seem like a relatively small drop to go from $60 to $50 per barrel, but actually that relatively small drop cuts the profits in half from a profit margin of $20 to a profit margin of $10, and it effectively means Russia gets half as much money from oil revenues, which make up the bulk of their budget. Now, in addition to all of this that I've said, there is also a bonus factor here that could potentially trigger a tipping point that will cause Russian oil revenues to fall from $50 per barrel to possibly $0 per barrel. And let me explain what I mean. Ukraine has for a long time had the ability, the technical military capability to target the port facilities that load oil onto oil tankers that then transport and sell Russian oil. This is Russia's shadow fleet. There's a lot of talk about this, and a lot of people might wonder, well, if Ukraine has the capability to do that, why haven't they done it? And the reason is that if Ukraine does this, it risks backlash because the global energy markets still have demand for Russian crude oil, and the world can't really operate or survive without it. However, a lowering oil price, a decreasing oil price, signals a decrease in demand for oil as well. As I said, the reason the price is dropping is because of these trade wars that are reducing global economic activity. And as energy prices get lower and lower, the political cost to Ukraine for taking these actions against Russian facilities drops drastically. If energy is super cheap and super abundant, that is a moment in time where nobody is going to care if Ukraine actually takes these facilities out. It's a moment in time where Ukraine can sort of get away with it while people are distracted by other things. And if Ukraine can do that, they can actually completely cut Russian energy off the market and drop Russian oil revenues by a massive amount just at this point where Russia is now over 3 years into this war, they are already completely overextended and already have a whole slew of other economic problems going on. And that would very rapidly accelerate the decline of the Russian state. Now, there's really not much more to say here. We'll just have to wait and see what happens. In the meantime, I will be monitoring all these factors and all the complexities involved, and I'll definitely be updating you guys when something moves in a direction that I think is meaningful. So don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell. And also, if you want to support my work, you can do so now through Buy Me a Coffee. It's a new way that a lot of you are requesting to do a one-time donation to the channel. I really appreciate the fact that so many of you ask me that and want to support the channel. It's actually really humbling. And obviously there is Patreon as well for those who want to get behind the channel on a monthly basis. Super grateful to all my supporters. As always, it's completely voluntary, but your support is one of the reasons why I'm able to pump out so much more content so much more frequently now. So I want to keep that up and accelerate it even more up to whatever my limit is. We'll find that limit together. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you on the next one.